If you were buying a house, you'd probably make sure to check everything. The paperwork, the finances, the insurance. But what if I told you there's something even more important you need to look into before signing the contract? Something that, if overlooked, could turn your dream home into a nightmare. In the first of today's 3 stories, Sarah thought she had covered all the bases and that nothing could go wrong. But there was one critical detail she missed. If she had known, she'd never have left her house the way she did. I am the file keeper, and welcome to my archive. The suffocating summer heat was stifling, but the quaint charm of my new neighborhood made it easier to bear. The small town had a slower pace, something I desperately needed after years of chaotic city life. I had spent the entire day unpacking boxes and tidying up my new house. The yard was a mess, overgrown grass, weeds choking the flower beds, and leaves scattered everywhere. I decided I'd tackle it later. Right now, all I wanted was a cold drink and a moment to rest. As I stood in the kitchen, I noticed someone moving outside. Peering through the window, I saw a man, mid-30s, with a lean build and sunburned skin, raking leaves on my front lawn. Curious, I stepped out onto the porch. "Hey," I called, shading my eyes from the sun. "Can I help you with something?" The man looked up, his expression open and friendly. "Hi there," he said, leaning on the rake. "I'm a neighbor. Thought I'd lend a hand. Yard was looking like it could use some attention." "Oh," I replied, surprised but relieved. "Thank you, that's so kind of you. I'm Sarah, by the way." He nodded. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. I'm Greg." Over the next few days, Greg became a familiar sight in my yard. Each morning, I'd wake up to find him tending to the flower beds, trimming the hedges, or mowing the lawn. At first, I was grateful. The yard was shaping up beautifully, and it was a relief not to have to do the work myself. However, I started to worry that Greg might be expecting payment, and I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't planning to hire a gardener. I planned to thank him that evening and address the situation, but as always, he was nowhere to be found when I got home. It was strange. Every morning, he'd be out there, carefully tending the yard, but by the time I returned, the place was quiet. I decided to catch him the next morning instead. It felt wrong not to acknowledge his efforts and clarify my position directly. The next morning, I spotted him pruning the roses near the driveway. I walked over, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Greg, I really appreciate all the work you've been doing," I said, handing him a mug. "But I hope you're not expecting me to pay for this." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Pay? No, of course not. I just wanted to help you settle in." Embarrassed, I stammered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. It's just, where I come from, people don't usually do things for free." Greg smiled. "Well, you're not in the city anymore. Here, neighbors look out for each other." As the days passed, Greg's generosity began to feel off. Every morning, he'd be outside, meticulously caring for my yard. Every evening, he'd vanish without a trace. I started to wonder, why was he doing all of this? Did he expect something in return? Was he trying to win my affection with his constant favors? The idea unsettled me, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him. After all, he hadn't crossed any boundaries. Then my attention shifted to something else inside the house. Lately, I'd started noticing other oddities. Things seemed slightly out of place. A chair moved an inch to the side. A cupboard left ajar when I was certain I'd closed it. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination, blaming the chaos of unpacking. Then there was the food. A few pieces of fruit, half a loaf of bread, small things that went missing without explanation. I was so exhausted from the move lately that I decided not to overthink it. I convinced myself it was just the fatigue playing tricks on me. One humid morning, while moving boxes in the basement, I noticed a faint outline on the wall near the floor. On closer inspection, I found a small, hidden door. My heart raced as I pushed it open. My breath hitched as I stared at the small hidden room. The mattress, the clothes, it all clicked into place. Someone had been living here. Without thinking, I bolted up the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. I flung open the front door and saw Greg outside, trimming the bushes as he always did. "Greg!" I shouted, running toward him. He turned, his expression concerned. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting his clippers down. I grabbed his arm. "You have to come with me. There's something in the basement. You won't believe this. I think someone's been hiding there." His brows furrowed, but he followed me without hesitation. Back in the basement, I pointed at the small door, my voice shaky. "Look, there's a room in there, a mattress, clothes. Someone's been living in my house." Greg crouched down, peering inside. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just ran his hand along the edge of the doorframe as if inspecting it. "Well?" I pressed, my panic rising. He stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. "You sure this isn't just something left behind by the last owner? Might have been here for years." "No," I snapped, shaking my head. "That's not possible. The clothes are clean. Someone's been here recently." I took a deep breath. "I'm calling the police." Greg's reaction was immediate. "No, don't do that." I froze, his words hanging in the air. "Why not?" He hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. "I just mean, they might think it's nothing. A waste of time, you know? Could have been left by anyone. You really don't want to bother them over something so small." His explanation felt wrong, forced, as if he were scrambling to come up with an excuse. And then it hit me. Those belongings, they were Greg's. That's why I never saw him after work. He must have been sneaking in to hide in the room and taking the opportunity to eat while I wasn't home. That would explain the food that had been disappearing. And the yard? He wasn't helping me out of kindness. He was maintaining his own lawn. After all, he wasn't my neighbor. He was living in my house. My heart raced, but I forced a smile, trying to mask my realization. "You know, you're probably right," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm just being paranoid. It's probably nothing." Greg's tense posture eased. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. "No harm in checking, though. I can clear out whatever's in there for you, if that helps." I nodded quickly, grateful for the out he'd unknowingly given me. "That would be great. Thank you, Greg. And I'm sorry for overreacting. Moving here from the city has made me jumpy about everything." "No problem," he said, his tone easy, as though we hadn't just unearthed a secret room in my house. "I'll handle it. Don't worry about a thing." We left the basement together, but the moment I stepped outside, I felt a deep, unshakable relief. I couldn't stay here. Not for another second. That evening, I packed everything I could fit into my car. Clothes, essentials, a few sentimental items. The rest could wait. I drove straight to my mother's house, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The thought of sleeping in that house again, or knowing Greg was still there, sent shivers down my spine. The next morning, I listed the house for sale and filed a police report. I didn't explain everything, just enough to ensure it was on record. I didn't want to deal with any more questions. As I handed the keys to my real estate agent, I felt a strange mix of relief and regret. I had wanted a quiet life, a charming neighborhood, a place to call my own. But I'd learned my lesson the hard way. Never again would I trade the comfort of a locked apartment for the openness of a house. Somewhere out there, Greg, or whoever he really was, might still be lurking. But one thing was certain, he wouldn't be my problem anymore. When I was a kid, my street was a paradise for play. The neighborhood children spent afternoons running, shouting and laughing, inventing games and hiding in each other's yards. It was as if time didn't exist. Our only worries were not being the last one found in hide and seek or scoring a point in dodgeball. But there was one boy who never played with us. He lived in the house next to mine. He was older and he never talked to anyone. He spent most of his time indoors, but sometimes I would catch him peeking out from his bedroom window. Whenever our eyes met, he would quickly duck behind the curtain. At first, no one thought much of it, but over time, The other kids started telling stories about him, saying he was strange, maybe even not normal. I confess I was curious, but he seemed harmless, so I didn't pay much attention. One afternoon, we were playing hide and seek. It was my turn to hide, and I chose his yard as my spot. I crouched behind a bush, keeping an eye out for my friends as they searched. That's when I felt it, a presence. I turned toward the porch, and there he was. For the first time, the boy was outside, alone. He was just standing there, watching me intently. My heart raced, but before I could move, one of my friends appeared in his yard. "Hey, did you see anyone hiding here?" my friend asked him. Terrified, I pressed a finger to my lips, silently pleading for him not to give me away. To my surprise, he replied, "No, I didn't see anyone." As soon as my friend left, I smiled in gratitude and quickly ran off to find a new hiding spot. I should have just let them find me that day. After that, everything changed. Before, he would peek out from behind his curtains, hiding the moment someone noticed him. Now he stared at me openly whenever I was outside, following me with his eyes. Worse, when I met his gaze, he didn't look away. I found it unsettling, but as long as I was with my friends, I felt safe. Then came the night the doorbell rang. My dad answered it and came back to tell me, "There's a friend of yours at the door." Confused, I went to see who it was. When I opened the door, I froze. It was him. He stood there, wearing a button-up shirt, shorts, and shiny shoes. The outfit was so out of place. "Do you want to play?" he asked, smiling, though it didn't seem genuine. I explained that it was late and my dad wouldn't let me play outside at night. He tilted his head slightly and said, "That's too bad. I can only play at night. My parents don't like it when I go out during the day." I apologized and closed the door. Then I stayed behind it, listening. He stood there for a few minutes before finally leaving. Months passed, and I nearly forgot about the incident until Halloween. That night, I was out trick-or-treating with my friends, running from house to house in costumes, laughing and collecting candy. Everything felt normal, festive, until I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was. The same button-up shirt, the same shorts, the same shiny shoes. No costume. "Can we play tonight?" he asked, as though he'd been waiting for this moment since the night at my door. A chill ran through me. He was still holding on to that brief interaction we'd had months earlier. His voice was calm, but there was something in his eyes, something that terrified me. "You can join us," I said, trying to act normal as I walked back toward my group of friends. "No," he replied. "I want to play with just you." I froze for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I ran, straight to my friends. When I glanced back, he was still there, standing motionless, watching me with that same unsettling stare. After that night, I stopped playing outside for a while. The thought of his eyes on me, even from a distance, was too much. I made excuses to stay indoors, but deep down, I was just scared. One evening, as my family returned home from dinner, I noticed unusual activity at his house. The lights were on, and a moving van was parked in the driveway. People were carrying boxes and furniture out. "They're moving," my mum said casually as we got out of the car. I stayed on the sidewalk, watching. He was there, standing on the porch, silently observing as the adults worked. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and he raised his hand as if to wave. I didn't wave back. The next morning, the house was empty. The curtains were gone and the yard looked even more overgrown than before. I felt relieved knowing he was gone, but something still didn't feel right. I started playing outside again, trying to return to normal, but every time I passed by his old house, I felt a shiver down my spine. Sometimes it felt like someone was still watching me. I don't know if it was just childhood paranoia or if something more sinister lingered in that house. But even now, when I visit the street where I grew up, I avoid looking at that window. I'm afraid of what I might see. It started like any other day. My name is Emily. I'm 22 and a psychology student in my 4th semester. My routine is predictable. Classes in the morning, internship in the afternoon, and evenings spent buried in textbooks. But that morning, something unusual happened. As I made my way to the bus stop, a man I didn't recognize stood across the street, waving at me with an almost unsettling familiarity. "Hey, do you live around here?" His tone was friendly, his smile disarming. "I do," I replied cautiously. "And you?" He introduced himself as Ryan. He said he'd just moved into the neighborhood and was still settling in. His easy demeanor made it hard to brush him off, so we chatted briefly before parting ways. In the days that followed, I saw Ryan more often, too often. Every time I went out, there he was. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence. He always greeted me with a warm smile and seemed genuinely interested in my life, my classes, my goals, even my favorite coffee shop. Eventually, Ryan became a fixture in my routine. His presence no longer felt strange, maybe even comforting. One afternoon, we ran into each other outside a cafe. As we walked back toward his house, he stopped abruptly, slapping his pocket with a sheepish grin. "Forgot my phone," he said. "Would you mind coming in while I grab it? It'll just take a second." I hesitated but agreed. His house was cozy, the kind of place that felt inviting. The air smelled faintly of lavender, and every detail, from the neat curtains to the polished furniture, seemed perfect. But it was the photos that caught my attention. They were everywhere, on the walls, the shelves, even the coffee table. Families smiling, moments frozen in time. A father, mother, and a little girl. "These are beautiful. Your family?" I asked, studying them. "Yeah," he replied with a soft smile. "But something struck me as odd. Why aren't you in any of these?" He chuckled. "I prefer being behind the camera. Capturing moments is what matters most, don't you think?" His answer felt heartfelt, maybe even sweet. After grabbing his phone, he turned to me with a hopeful look. "Hey, since you're here, why don't we order a pizza and hang out?" I almost said yes. His house was warm, his company easy, but I had an exam the next day and needed to study. "Maybe tomorrow," I said with a smile. His grin widened. "Tomorrow it is." The next day began with a sense of purpose. I attended my morning classes and took my exam, feeling relieved once it was over. My thoughts kept drifting back to Ryan and the plans we'd made. By the time I finished my test, I was eager to see him again. On the way home, I decided to stop by his house earlier than planned, a small smile tugging at my lips as I approached his door. I rang the bell, anticipation bubbling in my chest. But when the door opened, it wasn't Ryan who greeted me. An older man stood there, with grey streaks in his hair and a puzzled look on his face. "Can I help you?" he asked. For a moment, I hesitated. "Is Ryan home?" The man's brow furrowed. "Ryan? Yes, your son," I replied, glancing past him into the house. "We were supposed to meet today." He stepped outside, his expression hardening. "I don't have a son." I froze, my breath caught in my throat as my mind raced. "But I've been here yesterday. I've seen the photos, we talked." The man's face turned pale. "What photos?" I explained everything, meeting Ryan, the walks, the conversations, even the time I stepped inside the house. His confusion turned to alarm as he shook his head. "We just got back from a month-long trip yesterday," he said, his voice trembling. "No one's been living here." The words hit me like ice. My legs felt weak, my thoughts unraveling. I stared at the house. So familiar, yet now completely strange. Together we called the police. Officers arrived, searched the property and filed a report. But there was nothing, no sign of Ryan, no trace he'd ever been there. Weeks passed and Ryan was never found. Now, I can't shake the fear that follows me. Every time I step outside, I wonder if I'll see him again. Every shadow feels too close, every stranger's face too familiar. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering, what would have happened if I'd stayed that night instead of going home to study? Thank you for watching this video until the end. I hope you enjoyed these chilling neighbor stories. If you're craving more, don't forget to check out the suggested video on the screen. I'm sure you'll love it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring you even more creepy stories. See you next time, and watch out for your neighbors.